The petition of His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood, to have the Duchess, Eleanor Beaumont, legally declared deceased. The clerk's voice was a dry rasp of paper and dust, a sound that scraped against the high, vaulted ceiling of the chamber. It was a formality, a piece of grim legal theater played out before the highest court in the land. 5 years. 5 years since she had vanished from the world, a ghost leaving behind nothing but a cold bed and a single, magnificent sapphire on her pillow. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, stood straight and still. His face, carved from the same unyielding stone as his ancestors' monuments, betrayed nothing. He was a study in black wool and gray sorrow, a man performing the final, necessary act of erasure. Around him, the lords and barristers murmured, their whispers like the rustle of crows settling in a dead tree. They saw a grieving husband, a duke forced to secure his line, a tragedy reaching its quiet, procedural end. They did not see the hollow space behind his ribs, an emptiness that had grown over 5 years from a searing wound to a cold, permanent ache. They did not know that this petition was not his victory, but his final, public surrender. He had searched. Oh, he had searched. In the beginning, with a frantic, prideful rage. Later, with a quiet, desperate team of investigators who turned over every stone in England and found nothing but whispers and dead ends. Now he was done. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, had insisted. The title needed an heir. The dukedom needed a future. His duty, she had reminded him with the persistence of dripping water, was to Blackwood, not to a phantom. The Lord Chancellor cleared his throat, his jowls quivering slightly. His Grace has provided ample evidence of a thorough search. After a period of 5 years, with no word, no sign of life. He paused, adjusting his wig. The court is inclined to grant this petition, unless any new information has come to light. The question hung in the thick, silent air. It was rhetorical, a flourish before the gavel fell. Alistair closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He saw her face, not as the pale, withdrawn woman she had become in their final year together, but as she was on their wedding day, her eyes full of a light he had foolishly believed he could possess, rather than cherish. He had failed her. He knew it now, in the marrow of his bones. He had allowed his mother's poison to seep into the foundations of their marriage. He had chosen pride over faith. He had listened to lies because the truth required a strength he had not possessed. This hearing was the monument to his failure. The main doors at the far end of the chamber groaned. Every head turned. The sound was an intrusion, a crack in the solemnity of the moment. 2 figures stood silhouetted against the bright afternoon light flooding in from the corridor. A woman in a simple gray dress, her posture erect, her face pale but resolute, and holding her hand, a small boy with a shock of dark hair, clutching a little wooden soldier. The woman took a step forward, out of the glare and into the muted light of the court. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, found Alistair's across the cavernous room. A murmur rippled through the assembly, a wave of shock and disbelief. The Lord Chancellor squinted, leaning forward. "Good heavens," he breathed. Alistair did not hear him. He did not hear anything but the frantic, impossible hammering of his own heart. The world had tilted on its axis, the floor dropping away from beneath his feet. It was her, older, thinner, the softness of her youth weathered into a quiet, unyielding strength. But it was her, it was Eleanor, and the boy whose small, serious face was a miniature of his own, the boy who was now staring at him with the same piercing blue eyes that stared back at Alistair from his own mirror every morning. Eleanor's grip tightened on her son's hand. She met her husband's gaze, and for the first time in 5 years, the ghost of Blackwood Manor drew a breath and prepared to speak. The air in the ballroom at Blackwood had been thick enough to drink, heavy with the scent of wilting roses and beeswax. It was a smell Eleanor had come to associate with suffocation. It coated the back of her throat, a sweet, cloying perfume that clung to the velvet curtains and the heavy silk of her gown. The dress itself was a cage of whalebone and lace, another beautiful constraint in a life made of them. Across the long, gleaming expanse of the dining table, Alistair sat like a king in exile. His profile was perfect, severe, his attention fixed on a conversation about crop rotation with a neighboring lord. He had not truly looked at her all evening. His gaze had slid over her, acknowledging her presence as one might acknowledge a well-placed piece of art. The Duchess, a necessary and beautiful fixture. She felt a familiar wave of nausea and pushed a piece of venison around her plate with a silver fork. For weeks, this strange sickness had plagued her in the mornings, a weariness settling deep into her bones by afternoon. She had attributed it to the oppressive atmosphere of the house, to the weight of her own unhappiness. "You are looking pale, my dear," the Dowager Duchess Isolde observed from her position at Alistair's right hand. Her voice was like honey laced with ground glass. "Perhaps the season is too much for your delicate constitution." Eleanor offered a tight, polite smile. "I am quite well, Your Grace." Isolde's eyes, chips of blue ice so like her son's, flickered with something that was not concern. It was a measuring look, a veterinary inspection of prize-breeding stock that had so far failed to produce. 2 years of marriage, and the Blackwood nurseries remained silent. It was Eleanor's singular, public failing, and Isolde never missed an opportunity to highlight it. "Of course," Isolde murmured, placing a proprietary hand on Alistair's forearm. He did not pull away. He never did. "Alistair requires a strong wife. The duties of a duchess are unending." The implication was clear. Eleanor was not strong enough. She was not enough. Later the nausea returned, sharp and acidic. She excused herself, escaping the drone of conversation for the cool quiet of the gardens. The night air was a balm, clean and damp with the smell of earth and coming rain. She pressed a hand to her lower belly. A thought, a terrifying and wondrous possibility, had been taking root in her mind for days, a secret she had barely dared to whisper to herself. A child. Could it be? A flicker of warmth spread through her, a desperate, defiant hope. A child would change everything. It would give her purpose, a place in this cold, gilded world. It would be a piece of her, something that could not be managed or criticized by her mother-in-law. Perhaps it would even mend the chasm that had opened between her and Alistair, a distance that had grown from inches to miles without a single dramatic quarrel. It had been a slow erosion, a death by 1,000 polite neglects. He was consumed by his duties, by the vast machinery of the dukedom, and he was consumed by his mother, whose counsel he valued above all others, including his wife's. Eleanor had become a satellite, orbiting a world that had no real need of her. When she returned to the house, the party was breaking up. She saw Alistair in the hall, deep in conversation with Isolde. His mother was speaking in a low, urgent tone, her hand once again on his arm. Alistair's face was a thundercloud. He nodded curtly, his jaw tight. When he saw Eleanor approaching, his expression did not soften. It hardened. "Eleanor," he said, his voice clipped. "My study. Now." The warmth in her chest turned to ice. She followed him down the long, portrait-lined corridor, the heels of her slippers echoing in the vast silence. The house suddenly felt enormous, malevolent, the eyes of his ancestors watching her with cold disapproval. The study was Alistair's sanctuary, smelling of old leather and smoke. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting restless shadows on the walls. He did not invite her to sit. He stood behind his massive desk, a barrier between them, and tossed a folded piece of paper onto the polished wood. "Explain this," he commanded. The words were not a request. They were a verdict. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. It was a letter, written in an unfamiliar, florid hand. It was a love letter, passionate, intimate, filled with references to secret meetings and stolen moments. It was addressed to My dearest E, and it was signed only with an L. She read the words, and the world tilted. What is this? I have never seen this before in my life. Do not lie to me, Eleanor, he said, and his voice was the coldest thing she had ever heard. It was devoid of anger, of passion, of anything but a chilling, absolute certainty. My mother found it. It had fallen from your reticule. Your mother... The nausea roiled in her stomach, hot and bitter. It was a lie, a vicious, calculated lie. Alistair, you cannot possibly believe this. Look at me. I swear to you, this is not mine. I have no lover. Your recent sickness, your withdrawn nature, your secrets. He listed her symptoms as if they were evidence in a trial. It all makes a sickening kind of sense now. She stared at him, her heart splintering. He was not looking at his wife. He was looking at a stranger, a traitor. The possibility of a child, the secret hope she had carried, died on her lips. How could she offer him that sacred news now, when he looked at her with such contempt? He would see it as further proof of her deceit, the fruit of a sordid affair. You believe her, she whispered, the realization a physical blow. After all this time, you believe her over me. You did not even ask. You simply condemned me. The evidence is before me, he said, his voice like stone. In that moment, something inside her broke. Not her heart, that had been slowly cracking for months. It was her hope. The foolish, girlish hope that love could conquer the cold weight of duty and title, that the man she had married was still present behind the Duke's impassive mask. He was not. The Duke had consumed him whole. She did not cry. She did not scream. A strange, terrifying calm settled over her. The gilded cage had finally sprung its trap. Very well, she said, her voice a hollow echo in the grand room. She placed the letter back on the desk. If that is your judgment, Your Grace, then there is nothing more to be said. She turned and walked out, her back straight, her head held high. She did not look back. She could feel his eyes on her, cold and unforgiving. She could feel the chilling victory of his mother radiating from every shadow in the house. That night, she did not go to her own chambers. She went to a small, unused guest room at the far end of the servants' wing. She packed a small valise, not with gowns and jewels, but with the plainest dress she owned, a thick wool shawl, and all the pin money she had saved, a considerable sum she had hoarded without knowing why. Perhaps some part of her had always known she would need a means of escape. Her last act was to return to the ducal bedroom. It was empty. He had not sought her out. The bed was cold, the sheets undisturbed. She walked to her dressing table and unclasped the blackwood sapphire from her neck. The stone was heavy, cool against her skin, a magnificent burden. It was the symbol of her office, her marriage, her prison. She laid it on the pristine white pillow on his side of the bed. It glittered in the moonlight, a single, brilliant blue tear. A final, silent message. She was Eleanor Beaumont no longer. The Duchess of Blackwood was gone. Her hand went to her flat stomach, a protective, instinctive gesture. She was not alone. She had a reason to run, a reason to survive. She slipped out of the room, a shadow moving through the sleeping monolith of a house, and walked out into the rainy night, leaving the Duke to his title, his mother, and his ruinous pride. She never looked back. The salt spray of Port Blossom was a constant baptism. It clung to her hair, her clothes, the rough wool of her shawl. It weathered the skin on her hands and etched fine lines around her eyes. In 5 years, it had washed away the Duchess, leaving behind a woman named Ellen Eames, a widow who kept to herself and earned her living mending the torn nets of the fishing fleet and taking in laundry from the summering gentry. Her world had shrunk to the size of a small, damp cottage overlooking the gray, churning sea. It smelled of brine and wood smoke and drying herbs. It was a world of coarse linen, splintered wood, and the constant rhythmic crash of waves against the shore, and it was the only real home she had ever known. Her life was governed by the tides, by the seasons, by the small, fierce heartbeat of the boy who slept in the cot beside her bed. Thomas. He was the sun and the moon, the anchor and the sail of her existence. He had Alistair's dark, unruly hair and her quiet, observant nature, but his eyes were pure Beaumont, a startling, brilliant blue that could sometimes make her breath catch in her throat. He was her joy and her constant, terrifying secret. She had found her way here by instinct, seeking the sea, seeking anonymity. An old governess, Mistress Agnes Finch, a kind woman who had despaired of Eleanor's needlework but praised her mind, had retired to a small bookshop in a town not far from here. Eleanor had sought her out in the first desperate weeks, and Agnes, without asking for details she knew she should not hear, had helped her find the cottage and invent the story of the late Mr. Eames, a sea captain lost to the waves. Agnes was her only link to the past, a past Eleanor worked hard to forget. But it was a ghost that lingered, in the face of her son, in the moments of quiet before sleep, when the memory of a cold voice and a colder accusation would surface like wreckage from a storm. She had built a life of her own, a life of hardship and authenticity. She was strong. She was a survivor, but she was not entirely free. Sometimes, when a wealthy family's carriage rumbled through the village, she would pull Thomas close, her heart hammering against her ribs, a primal fear that her gilded cage would find her and reclaim her son. The thought was a shard of ice in her soul. She would die before she let them take him. Meanwhile, at Blackwood Manor, silence had become the reigning monarch. Alistair had banished the memory of his wife as best he could. He had ordered her rooms closed, her portraits moved to storage. He had thrown himself into the management of his estates with a punishing ferocity, working from dawn until long after midnight. He filled his days with ledgers and reports, with anything that would keep the howling emptiness at bay. His mother had won. Isolde now reigned supreme over the household, her victory complete. Yet it was a bitter triumph. The son she had sought to control had become a remote, unreadable man of iron. The joy and life had gone out of the house, replaced by a stifling, oppressive order. There were no more grand parties. The halls echoed with their footsteps. Isolde constantly pushed for him to remarry. "The line, Alistair. You have a duty." "I am aware of my duty," he would reply, his voice flat, his eyes never leaving the document he was reading. The regret had been a slow-acting poison. In the first year, pride had sustained him, the fury of her betrayal, the humiliation of her flight. But as time passed, the certainty of his judgment began to fray. He remembered her face in the study that night, the shattered look in her eyes. It was not the face of a guilty woman. It was the face of a woman whose world had just been annihilated. The turning point came on the 4th anniversary of her disappearance. He had walked into his mother's drawing room and found her standing before a mirror, fastening the Blackwood sapphire around her neck. The great blue stone glowed against the black silk of her gown. She wore it as a trophy. "It is a pity to let it languish in a vault," she said, seeing his reflection in the glass. "It belongs on the Duchess of Blackwood." He looked at the jewel, the very one Eleanor had left on his pillow, and something cold and hard settled in his stomach. He saw not a duchess but a usurper, a vulture wearing borrowed plumes. That night he wrote a letter, not to a detective agency that catered to the nobility, but to a quiet, ruthlessly discreet man named Davies, a former barrister known for his ability to uncover truths that were buried deep. Alistair did not ask him to find Eleanor. He asked him to investigate the letter. He wanted to know, with absolute certainty, if the foundation of his life's greatest ruin was built on truth or sand. It took Davies almost a year in which Alistair felt himself to be in a state of suspended animation, waiting for a verdict on his own soul. The Dowager Duchess, sensing a shift in him, pressed harder for the legal petition. "It is time, Alistair. You must be free to move on. We must declare her dead." He had finally, wearily, agreed. The process was set in motion. The date for the hearing was set. He felt nothing but a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. 2 days before the hearing was scheduled, Davies arrived at Blackwood. He was a small, gray man who blended into the shadows. He laid out his findings on the polished surface of Alistair's desk, the same desk where the condemnation had occurred 5 years earlier. The evidence was methodical, irrefutable. The paper of the forged letter was from a specific stationer in London, a purchase traced to his mother's lady's maid. The handwriting was identified as that of a disgraced clerk, known for his skill in mimicry, a man who had received a mysterious and substantial payment a week before Eleanor's flight. The payment was traced back to an account held by the Dowager Duchess. It was all there, a meticulous, cold-blooded conspiracy. Alistair stared at the documents, the neat columns of facts and dates. The world did not spin. It simply stopped. The cold ache in his chest became a white-hot agony of self-loathing. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant, prideful fool. He had not been betrayed by his wife. He had been betrayed by his own mother, and in doing so he had committed the greater sin. He had betrayed the one person who had trusted him, and he had thrown her to the wolves. "There is one more thing, Your Grace," Davies said, his voice quiet. "In tracing the forger, we found a trail, a faint one. He spoke of a favor he did for the Dowager's maid, arranging a carriage that went north, towards the coast. I took the liberty of following it. There is a woman, living in a fishing village called Port Blossom. She goes by the name of Ellen Eames." Alistair looked up, his heart ceasing to beat. "She fits the Duchess's description," Davies continued, oblivious to the Duke's paralysis. "And, Your Grace, she has a son, a boy of about 4.5 years old. The villagers say he has the most remarkable blue eyes." The journey to Port Blossom was a blur of churning carriage wheels and a storm raging within him. He did not know what he would say. What could he say? "I am sorry," was a pathetically inadequate phrase for the chasm of his failure. He found the village huddled against the sea, a collection of stone cottages bracing against the wind. The air smelled clean and harsh. He walked through the narrow streets, a man out of place in his fine London coat, drawing curious stares. He asked for Ellen Eames, and was directed to a small cottage at the edge of the quay. And then he saw her. She was standing by the water's edge, haggling with a fisherman over a basket of herring. She wore a faded blue work dress and a thick wool shawl against the biting wind. Her hair was tied back simply, loose strands whipping across her face. She was magnificent. The fragile beauty he remembered had been forged into something elemental, something real and strong. The sight of her stole the breath from his lungs. She was alive. He started towards her, his mind a blank slate, his heart a frantic drum. He had to speak to her, had to begin the impossible task of explaining. Before he could reach her, a small boy came running from the direction of the cottage, his small legs pumping. "Mama! Mama, look!" The boy ran straight to Eleanor, and she turned, her face breaking into a smile of such pure, unadulterated love that it pierced Alistair to the core. She knelt and swept the child into her arms. "What is it, my love?" she asked, her voice soft. The boy held up a small, crudely carved wooden soldier. "Old man Hemlock gave it to me, for helping with the lines." Alistair stopped dead. From 20 paces away, he saw the boy's face clearly, his own dark hair, his own stubborn chin, and his own eyes, the Beaumont eyes, bright, intelligent, and impossibly blue. The world narrowed to that single point. His son. He had a son who had been raised in a fishing cottage, who treasured a wooden soldier, who knew nothing of the title and the lands that were his birthright, a son he had abandoned before he was even born. The agony in his chest was so profound, he thought it might split him in two. Eleanor must have felt his gaze. Her head snapped up, her smile vanishing. Her eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in a pure, undiluted terror that was far worse than any anger. She scrambled to her feet, pulling the boy behind her skirts, her body forming a shield. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice low and fierce, the wind snatching the words from her lips. He took a hesitant step forward. "Eleanor." Her name was a prayer, a curse, a wound. "Do not!" she hissed, taking a step back. "Do not come near us!" "The letter," he began, his voice hoarse. "It was a lie, a forgery. My mother—" She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that held no humor. "Your mother. Of course. And you, her willing fool. Did it really take you 5 years to piece that together? Or did you simply grow tired of her company? I hired a man to investigate. I know the truth. All of it." "The truth?" She looked at him, her eyes blazing with the cold fire of 5 winters spent alone. "The truth is that you threw me away without a second thought. The truth is I have scraped and fought for every meal my son has eaten, while you sat in your palace. The truth is you are a stranger to me, and you are a stranger to him." She gestured to the boy, who was peering around her legs, his blue eyes wide with confusion and apprehension. "He is my son, Eleanor," Alistair said, the words tasting of ash. "No," she retorted, her voice shaking with rage. "He is my son. You forfeited any claim to that title 5 years ago in your study." He saw the iron wall of her pain and her pride, a fortress built stone by stone over half a decade. He could not breach it. Not here. Not now. He saw the fear in her eyes, the terror that he, the powerful Duke of Blackwood, had come to rip her child from her arms. "I am not here to take him," he said, his voice cracking. "I swear to you." "Then why are you here? To ease your conscience? To see the ruin you made? Well, you have seen it. Now go. Go back to your world and leave us to ours." She turned, grabbing Thomas's hand, and all but ran back towards her cottage, pulling her son along with her. The cottage door slammed shut, a final, definitive sound. Alistair stood alone on the quay, the sea wind whipping at his coat. The fisherman stared at him, then wisely turned back to his nets. He had found her. He had found his son, and he had lost them all over again. He looked down at his hands. They were clean, manicured, the hands of a duke. They had never known a day of real work. He thought of Eleanor's hands, rough and chapped from the salt water and the lye soap. He had done this to her. He knew then that words were useless. Apologies were meaningless insults against the scale of his failure. The hearing in London was in 2 days. It was a farce, a public declaration of a lie. But it was also an opportunity, a stage. He would not use it to reclaim his wife. He would use it to give her back her name, and he would let the entire world bear witness. The journey back to London was a torment. Every clatter of the wheels on the road was a tick of a clock, counting down to a confrontation he was not sure he could survive. He sent a message ahead to Davies with terse, specific instructions. He did not eat. He did not sleep. He sat and stared out at the rolling countryside, seeing only the furious, terrified face of his wife and the bewildered blue eyes of his son. Eleanor, meanwhile, was trapped in a storm of her own. The moment the cottage door slammed, her strength deserted her. She slid to the floor, pulling Thomas into her lap, her body shaking uncontrollably. "Mama, who was that man?" Thomas asked, his small voice filled with concern. "No one, my love," she whispered into his hair, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. "Just a man from a long time ago." But he was not no one. He was the Duke of Blackwood, her husband, Thomas's father, and he had found them. The fear she had lived with for 5 years had materialized, a tall, dark figure on the quay. He said he would not take Thomas, but she did not believe him. Men like Alistair did not leave heirs to grow up in fishing villages. They collected them, like property. That evening, Agnes Finch arrived, her face grim. A boy from the village had run to fetch her. She found Eleanor pacing the small cottage like a caged animal. "He was here, Agnes," Eleanor said, without preamble. "Alistair, he found us." Agnes's kind face tightened. What did he want? "He spoke of lies, of his mother. He knows about Thomas." She wrung her hands. "He will take him from me. I know he will. We have to run. Again." "And where will you go, my dear?" Agnes asked gently. "He is the Duke of Blackwood. If he wishes to find you, he will. There is nowhere in this kingdom you can hide forever." Despair washed over Eleanor. "Then what am I to do?" "You fight," Agnes said, her voice surprisingly firm. "You stop running. This hearing you told me about, the one to declare you dead, it is still happening?" Eleanor nodded numbly. "Then you go to it," Agnes declared. "You walk into that court and you reclaim your life. You do not let him erase you. You stand before them all with your son, and you show them that you are not dead. You survived. You, Eleanor Beaumont, Duchess of Blackwood." The idea was audacious, terrifying. To return to that world, to face the whispers and the stares. But the alternative, a life spent looking over her shoulder, was no life at all. Agnes was right. The only way out was through. "He will have all the power, all the lawyers," Eleanor whispered. "He will have power," Agnes conceded. "But you, my dear, will have the truth. And you will have his son. That is a power he cannot comprehend." Alistair arranged their travel, sending a plain, unmarked carriage with a message delivered by a tight-lipped coachman. It contained a simple note and a purse of money. "For your expenses, I will not approach you. Do as you see fit." Eleanor used the money to buy a new dress, a simple but dignified gown of dove-gray wool, and a smart little coat and trousers for Thomas. She would not appear before them as a pauper, but she would not wear the silks of a duchess either. She would be herself. They stayed in London with Agnes, who had a small, clean flat above a bakery. The city was a roaring, overwhelming beast after the quiet of Port Blossom. Thomas was mesmerized by the endless parade of horses and people. Eleanor felt as if she were walking through a dream, the past rising up around her like a fog. The morning of the hearing, she dressed herself and her son with trembling hands. She knelt before Thomas, straightening his small collar. "Today, we are going to a very important room," she said, keeping her voice steady. "There will be many people there, and they might be surprised to see us. I need you to be very brave and hold my hand tightly." "Like the man on the boat in the storm?" Thomas asked, his mind always on the sea. "Exactly like that," she said, her throat tight. She smoothed his dark hair, a gesture that was an agony of love and fear. His hair was just like Alistair's. "Is the sad man going to be there?" Thomas asked. "The man from the beach?" "Yes," Eleanor said softly. "He will be there." And so she had walked through the doors of the court, a ghost returning to the land of the living, her small, unknowing son holding her hand. The collective gasp of the assembled lords was a physical force, but she weathered it. She kept her eyes on Alistair. She saw the profound shock on his face, the raw, unguarded emotion. But she also saw something else: resignation, relief, as if he had been waiting for this. He did not rush forward. He did not speak. He simply stood, a prisoner at his own trial, and accepted the judgment of her arrival. The Lord Chancellor, after a moment of sputtering confusion, called for order. The proceedings were thrown into chaos. Barristers huddled, whispering frantically. But Eleanor did not move. She stood in the center of the room, a fixed point in the swirling storm, her grip on Thomas's hand unshakable. She had found her voice, not in shouting, but in the simple, undeniable act of being, of existing. The hearing was adjourned in disarray. The story would be all over London by nightfall. The Duchess was alive, and the Duke had an heir. Eleanor allowed herself to be ushered into a private antechamber by a flustered clerk. She refused Alistair's attempt to follow, the clerk closing the door firmly in the Duke's face. She sank onto a velvet bench, her composure finally crumbling. Thomas, sensing her distress, climbed into her lap and put his small arms around her neck. "Are you all right, Mama?" "I am now, my love," she whispered, burying her face in his shoulder. "I am now." An hour later, there was a soft knock on the door. It was Agnes. "Alistair is gone," she said. "He left a message. He will not trouble you. He said he has given a full account of the matter to the Lord Chancellor. He said his mother has been escorted from Blackwood." Eleanor absorbed this slowly. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had exposed his own mother, dismantled his own world, to give her back her name. "He also asked," Agnes continued, hesitating, "if he might call upon you here, tomorrow, to speak with Thomas." The request was a fresh wave of panic, but looking at her son, who was now happily rolling his wooden soldier along the arm of the bench, she knew this was a reckoning that could not be avoided. Thomas deserved to know his father, and Eleanor needed to know what kind of man his father had become. The next day, Alistair arrived at Agnes's humble flat. He was not dressed as a duke, but in a simple, dark suit. He looked as if he had not slept in a week. He brought no gifts, no offerings of jewels or money. He simply stood in the doorway, his eyes finding Thomas immediately. Eleanor watched, her heart a painful knot in her chest. Alistair did not speak to her. He walked slowly into the room and knelt down, bringing himself to the boy's level. Thomas looked up at him, his blue eyes curious, not afraid. He was still clutching his wooden soldier. "Hello," Alistair said, his voice rough with emotion. "My name is Alistair." "I am Thomas," the boy replied, with the solemnity of a 4-year-old. Alistair's gaze fell to the toy in Thomas's hand. "That is a very fine soldier." "Old Man Hemlock made him," Thomas said proudly. "He protects the ships." Alistair nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It was the first genuine smile Eleanor had seen from him in over 6 years. "A very important job." He looked at his son, truly looked at him, not as an heir or a title, but as a small boy. The awe and the regret on his face were so profound, they were almost painful to witness. I am your father, Thomas." Thomas looked from Alistair to his mother, his expression unreadable. Eleanor gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Returning his gaze to Alistair, Thomas simply said, "Oh." He then held out the wooden soldier. "Would you like to hold him? He's very brave." The simple, innocent offer seemed to shatter the last of Alistair's composure. He reached out a trembling hand and took the small piece of carved wood, as if it were the crown jewels. He stared at it, his throat working. He was the Duke of Blackwood, a man of immense power and wealth, and he was being undone by a child's toy. He stayed for an hour. He did not press. He did not make demands. He spoke with Thomas about the sea, about fishing boats, about the different kinds of knots. He listened, his attention absolute. When he left, he handed the soldier back to Thomas with the utmost gravity. At the door, he finally turned to Eleanor. His eyes were full of a pain she was only just beginning to comprehend. "I have sent the evidence from my investigator to you, by courier," he said quietly. "The proof of my mother's actions. The original forged letter. It is all yours, to do with as you wish. Publish it. Use it to divorce me. It is your truth, Eleanor. I am giving you back your freedom, your name. I have no right to ask for anything more." He bowed his head, a gesture of profound humility, and left. The package arrived that afternoon. She read through the meticulous report, the cold, hard facts of Isolde's betrayal. She saw the photograph of the forged letter, the words that had destroyed her life. And she saw the proof of Alistair's relentless search for the truth. He had not been trying to find her. He had been trying to find his own culpability. For the first time in 5 years, a feeling other than anger or fear towards him began to surface. It was a fragile, tentative thing. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. He had been a fool, yes, but a fool who was now paying the highest price for his folly. He was not trying to buy his way back into her life. He was trying to earn it. They did not return to Blackwood Manor, not at first. Eleanor took rooms in a quiet part of London, wanting to give Thomas time to adjust. Alistair visited every day. He never came as the Duke. He came as a father. He took Thomas to see the boats on the Thames, to fly a kite on the Heath. He read him stories and taught him his letters. He was patient, gentle, and unfailingly respectful of Eleanor's boundaries. He was courting his own son. And in the quiet moments, he began, slowly, to court his wife. He did not speak of the past unless she brought it up. He did not ask for her to return. He simply talked to her, about his day, about books he had read. He asked for her opinion on estate matters, on a new school he was planning for the tenants' children. He treated her not as a duchess, but as an equal, an intelligent partner whose mind he valued. The iron walls around her heart began to thaw. She saw the man he was becoming, humbled, thoughtful, and deeply devoted to their son. She saw the man she had once hoped he could be. One rainy afternoon, as they sat in her parlor watching Thomas build a tower of blocks, she finally spoke the words that had been sitting in her heart. "I forgive you, Alistair." He looked up, his face stricken with a hope so raw it was painful. "Eleanor, I forgive you for your blindness," she continued, her voice clear and steady. "For your pride, because I see the man you are now, and he is a man our son can be proud of." He did not move from his chair. He simply closed his eyes, and she saw a single tear trace a path down his cheek. It was a tear for 5 lost years, for a world of pain, and for the impossible, miraculous grace of a new beginning. Their return to Blackwood was on her terms. The house was aired out, the heavy, oppressive furniture replaced. Isolde's stern portrait was removed from the main hall. Light and laughter began to fill the once silent corridors. Thomas, the rightful heir, chased a puppy through the gardens where his mother had once walked in lonely desperation. They were a family, forged in the crucible of betrayal and rebuilt on a foundation of hard-won truth. Alistair was no longer just the Duke. He was a husband and a father. His priorities irrevocably changed. Together they used their power not for social climbing, but for tangible good, funding schools and improving the lives of their tenants. One evening, months later, they stood on the terrace, watching the sun set over the rolling hills of their estate. Thomas was asleep upstairs, his wooden soldier on the nightstand beside him. Alistair turned to her, a small velvet box in his hand. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was the Blackwood sapphire. It glittered in the twilight, a star of impossible blue. "I know what this meant to you," he said, his voice low. "A cage, a burden." She looked at the jewel and felt no trace of the old bitterness. It was just a thing, a beautiful stone. It held no more power over her. "I am not giving it to the Duchess of Blackwood," he continued, taking the necklace from the box. The stone felt cool in his palm. "I am giving it to Eleanor, the woman I love, the mother of my son, the strongest person I have ever known, if you will have it." He did not move to place it around her neck. He held it out to her, an offering, a choice. She looked from the jewel to his face, to the open, vulnerable love in his eyes. She saw the entirety of their journey there, the pain, the regret, the penance, and the hope. She smiled, a true, warm smile that reached her eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "I will." She turned, and he gently fastened the clasp at her nape. The cold stone settled against her skin, but it was not cold for long. It warmed with the heat of her body, no longer a symbol of ownership or duty, but a promise of a future they would build together, not as a duke and his duchess, but as Alistair and Eleanor, survivors of the storm, finally home.